On the night of October 26, 1942, the outcome of the Guadalcanal campaign hung in the balance. Henderson Field, the airstrip that gave the Allies air superiority over the Solomon Islands, was defended by a thin line of exhausted Marines from the 7th Regiment. Among them was Sergeant Mitchell Paige, a 24-year-old regular Marine from Charleroi, Pennsylvania, who had enlisted in 1936. Paige commanded a machine gun platoon consisting of 4 M1917A 1 Browning 30 caliber heavy machine guns and 33 men, positioned on a critical ridge approximately 1 mile south of the airfield. What happened in the next few hours would result in one of the most remarkable individual actions in Marine Corps history. By late October 1942, both American and Japanese forces on Guadalcanal were approaching exhaustion. The campaign had begun in August with the American invasion, and 3 months of brutal fighting had taken a severe toll on both sides. Disease, particularly malaria and dysentery, was as dangerous as combat. Supply lines were precarious, with both forces operating at the edge of their logistical capabilities. The Japanese 17th Army, under Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, had been ordered to retake Henderson Field at all costs. Tokyo considered Guadalcanal a critical test of Japanese defensive capabilities in the Pacific. For this operation, troops from the 2nd Division, also known as the Sendai Division, were assigned to break through the southern perimeter defenses. The main assault would be led by the division's 16th Infantry Regiment, considered one of the Japanese Army's elite units. Japanese intelligence had underestimated American strength on the island, believing they faced only a few thousand demoralized troops. In reality, the Marines had been reinforced and were better supplied than Japanese planners assumed. Nevertheless, the Japanese High Command was confident that aggressive night attacks would overcome American firepower advantages. The American defensive line in this sector was held by Lieutenant Colonel Herman H. Hannikin's 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. Paige's platoon was part of Company H, positioned on what became known as the Bloody Ridge sector. Intelligence had warned of an impending attack, but the Marines were stretched dangerously thin. Paige's platoon held a front of approximately 100 yards, far more than doctrine recommended for 4 machine gun positions. Standard tactical guidance called for roughly 25 to 30 yards per gun position to allow for effective interlocking fields of fire. The weather was typical for Guadalcanal in October, hot, humid, with intermittent rain that turned the ground to mud. Visibility in the jungle terrain was limited to a few yards, particularly at night. The Marines had been on the line for weeks with minimal rest and inadequate rations. Many were suffering from tropical diseases. Some had lost 20 to 30 pounds since landing on the island. Paige himself had already demonstrated leadership and tactical skill in earlier engagements. His men trusted him, and he had trained them relentlessly in machine gun operations. This training would prove critical in the hours to come. In the late evening hours of October 26th, Japanese artillery began a preparatory bombardment. At approximately 21:30 hours, Japanese infantry attacked in force. The assault tactics were characteristic of Japanese doctrine at the time: aggressive frontal attacks preceded by artillery, with troops advancing in waves while shouting to create psychological pressure on defenders. Japanese officers believed that aggressive spirit and willingness to accept casualties would overcome American firepower. Paige's machine guns opened fire. The M1917A1 Browning, a water-cooled weapon with a cyclic rate of fire between 450 and 600 rounds per minute, was devastating against massed infantry when properly employed. The weapon's design dated back to World War I, but it remained highly effective. The water cooling system consisted of a jacket around the barrel that held approximately 1 gallon of water, allowing for sustained fire that would have been impossible with air-cooled weapons. Trained crews maintained a sustained rate of approximately 150 to 200 rounds per minute to prevent barrel burnout and conserve ammunition, though combat conditions often pushed this limit. The M1917A1 fired the .30-06 Springfield cartridge, the same round used in the M1 Garand rifle. Effective range was approximately 1,000 yards, though maximum range extended much further. The ammunition was fed from 250 round cloth belts, which required careful handling to prevent jams. The initial Japanese waves were cut down, but the assault continued. Japanese commanders committed more troops, pushing through their own casualties. This was the fundamental problem facing the Marine defenders. The Japanese were willing to accept enormous casualties to achieve their objective. Wave attacks continued despite devastating losses. Paige's crews worked their guns with practiced efficiency. Each gun required a crew of at least 3 men, a gunner, an assistant gunner to feed ammunition, and an ammunition bearer. In practice, crews were often larger to allow for rotation and to handle the heavy ammunition boxes. The assistant gunner's role was particularly critical, as improper ammunition feeding could cause jams at the worst possible moment. As the night wore on, the intensity of the attack increased significantly. Japanese troops worked closer through the jungle, using cover and advancing during brief pauses in Marine fire. The sound was tremendous. Machine guns, rifle fire, explosions from grenades and mortars, and the constant shouting of Japanese attackers. In the early morning hours of October 27th, Paige's situation deteriorated rapidly. A mortar round struck his number 1 gun position, killing the crew instantly. The explosion also destroyed the weapon itself. Minutes later, his number 3 gun was overrun in close combat after Japanese troops worked around its flank. The crew fought with rifles and bayonets before being overwhelmed. The number 4 gun ran out of ammunition, and the crew withdrew under orders to rearm and return, but were pinned down before they could make it back. By approximately 02:30 hours, only Paige and his number 2 gun crew remained in position. Then a Japanese grenade killed or wounded the remaining crew members. Paige was alone. What Sergeant Paige did next has been documented in official after-action reports, witness statements, and his Medal of Honor citation. Rather than withdraw, Paige continued to man his machine gun. He fired controlled bursts at the advancing Japanese infantry, maintaining fire discipline despite the circumstances. This required extraordinary composure. Panicked firing would have depleted his ammunition within minutes. When his ammunition ran low, he crawled across the position under fire to retrieve ammunition belts from casualties. This meant moving through an area that Japanese troops were actively trying to penetrate in darkness while under fire. The M1917. A1's water cooling system allowed for sustained fire far beyond what air-cooled weapons could manage. But the extremest combat conditions pushed even this robust design to its limits. The water in the cooling jacket would begin to boil during sustained fire, creating steam that vented through a tube. In prolonged engagements, the water could boil away entirely, though this typically took considerable time. When mechanical issues or tactical necessity required it, Paige moved to another gun position, brought that weapon into action, and continued firing. Moving between gun positions in darkness, under fire, while carrying ammunition, represented an extraordinary level of tactical skill and courage. Each position was separated by several yards, and Japanese troops were actively attempting to infiltrate the defensive line. Paige would have been moving through areas where enemy soldiers could have been mere feet away in the darkness. Over the next several hours, he operated multiple machine guns, moving between positions to create the impression of a larger defensive force. This psychological effect was significant. Japanese commanders could not understand why this section of the line would not break. They had seen other positions fall silent. They knew they had inflicted casualties. Yet the machine gun fire continued from what appeared to be multiple positions. Japanese troops attempted to flank his position. Paige engaged them with hand grenades from the machine gun emplacements. The M1917A1 positions typically had small stocks of hand grenades for close defense, as the machine guns themselves were vulnerable to close assault. At least one Japanese soldier reached his foxhole. Paige killed him in hand-to-hand combat before returning to the machine gun. This suggests the fighting reached extremely close quarters at times, likely within a few yards. The critical factor was that Paige's position was the center of the defensive line. If it collapsed, Japanese forces would have a clear penetration route to Henderson Field, less than a mile away. Once through the Marine lines, Japanese troops could reach the airfield and attack the supporting units, aviation personnel, and supply dumps. The entire defensive position could unravel from a single breakthrough. Paige's continuous fire prevented this breakthrough for over 4 hours. No reinforcements reached his position during this time. The Marines on either side of him were engaged in their own desperate fights. The company commander knew Paige's position was under extreme pressure, but had no reserves to commit. The entire battalion was engaged along its front. At approximately 0600 hours, as dawn broke, Paige assessed the situation. The Japanese assault had stalled but not retreated. He made a tactical decision that was both unconventional and effective. By this time, the reinforcements began to arrive. Unable to maneuver effectively with the heavy, water-cooled machine gun, Paige grabbed a lighter weapon, most likely an air-cooled machine gun or a Browning automatic rifle, and advanced down the ridge towards the Japanese positions, firing as he moved. This action had two effects. First, it broke the tactical stalemate. The Japanese forces, already exhausted from hours of unsuccessful assault, began to withdraw. Second, it inspired nearby Marines to join the counterattack. Within minutes, the Japanese assault had been repulsed. By 0630 hours, the battle in Paige's sector was over. The immediate aftermath revealed the scale of the engagement. Later counts identified over 110 Japanese dead directly in front of Paige's position. This number only included bodies that could be counted in the immediate area. The actual Japanese casualties were certainly higher when including wounded who withdrew or bodies in areas that could not be immediately searched. His machine gun platoon had sustained approximately 50% casualties, 16 killed or wounded from the original 33 men. Paige had fired an estimated 1,400 rounds of .30 caliber ammunition. Given that each round weighed approximately 25 grams, this represented roughly 35 kilograms or 77 pounds of ammunition fed through his weapons. He had operated at least 4 different machine gun positions. He had fought continuously for approximately 4 hours without relief, an extraordinary feat of physical endurance, even without considering the combat stress and mortal danger. His company commander found Paige still at his gun position after dawn. According to witnesses, Paige's hands were severely blistered from handling hot weapons. The machine gun's barrel and other metal components would have been extremely hot after hours of sustained fire. His shoulders were bruised from machine gun recoil. The M1917A1 produced significant recoil despite its heavy weight, and firing hundreds of rounds would have taken a physical toll. His hearing was temporarily damaged from sustained exposure to weapons fire without hearing protection, which was not standard issue at the time. Paige was also suffering from dehydration and exhaustion. The physical demands of operating heavy machine guns, moving between positions, carrying ammunition, and fighting in tropical heat for 4 hours straight would have pushed even a well-conditioned Marine to his limits. The Japanese offensive continued elsewhere along the Marine perimeter, but failed to achieve a breakthrough anywhere along the line. The defense of Henderson Field held. The battle that became known as the Battle for Henderson Field, or the Battle of the Lunga Perimeter, was effectively decided in these early morning hours of October 27th. Within days, the Japanese 17th Army began withdrawing from the Henderson Field area, effectively ending their ability to contest control of Guadalcanal through major ground operations. Paige remained on Guadalcanal until January 1943, when he deployed to Melbourne, Australia, with the 1st Marine Division. It was there that he received his Medal of Honor. Marine Corps Commandant General Alexander A. Vandergrift personally presented the decoration to newly promoted 2nd Lieutenant Paige in Melbourne. Paige's wartime service continued. In June 1943, he was promoted to 1st Lieutenant. That September, he deployed with the 1st Marine Division to New Guinea, joining the 6th Army for the assault on Cape Gloucester, New Britain, which commenced on December 26, 1943. After Cape Gloucester, the division withdrew to the Russell Islands in May 1944 for rest and refitting at Pavuvu. In July 1944, 1st Lieutenant Paige was transferred back to the United States and assigned to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. He was promoted to captain on February 28, 1945. In June 1945, Captain Paige became Tactical Training Officer at Camp Matthews, California. The following September, he was assigned to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot as a Recruit Training Officer. In May 1946, he was placed on inactive duty. Paige rarely discussed his actions at Guadalcanal in detail. In later interviews, he emphasized the role of his training, his men, and the importance of the mission rather than his personal heroism. This was typical of many Medal of Honor recipients of his generation. He passed away in 2003 at the age of 85. The defense of Guadalcanal involved thousands of Marines fighting in brutal conditions over 6 months. Many performed acts of extraordinary courage. Mitchell Paige's actions on the night of October 26, 1942, stand out even in that context. He held a position that should have required 30 men. He fought for hours alone against battalion-strength forces. He personally operated multiple machine guns, expended over 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and then led a counterattack that broke the enemy assault. The official records confirm these facts. The witness statements support them. The battlefield evidence corroborates them. Sometimes in war, everything depends on one person making the decision to hold their ground no matter what. On that night in October 1942, Sergeant Mitchell Paige made that decision. Henderson Field remained in American hands. The Guadalcanal campaign was secured, and the course of the Pacific War shifted permanently in favor of the Allies. One man, several guns, and hours that changed history.